right, I think we'll get started. Thanks everybody for coming.
Woo!
Super exciting. Keri's had a lot of coffee. She's been up since 5 a.m. She organizes the camp, so bear with us. The title has changed a couple times because it turns out we're really not funny and we're really bad at titles, but we landed on Content Strategy, a Minimal Viable Donut, which will make maybe sense later. So this is...
Hi, I'm Keri Poeppe. I am a project manager, and because I'm a project manager, I also get to be a content strategist and sometimes do QA and a lot of stuff with projects. But I work at Electric Citizen, which is a design build Drupal firm here in the Twin Cities.
And by the way, her parents changed her last name after they got to know her a little bit. Very peppy. And I'm Lynn Winter. I work at August App. I'm a production director. Spent most of my years doing project management stuff, and so that also meant I get to do a lot of content strategy in the last couple years. And this picture was created by my coworker that really likes White Walkers and Game of Thrones, and he really should probably do work at work and not beautiful pictures. But also, I knew I had big teeth, but this just really emphasized that. So, all right, so we are here to talk about donuts today.
You have no content.
Donuts. Specifically cake donuts. And I actually got some cake donuts hot this morning. Unfortunately, we don't have that many, so please cut it into pieces. And then the folks that sat in the back, I don't know. So just take a little bite, pass it down, share the napkins, get really friendly. So cake donuts came around in the 1800s. They're a good staple. They're a wonderful donut, right? Well, I think that's crap. I want this, or this, or this, or this, or this, or this. God, they make some really good donuts, right? It's amazing. Even bacon donuts. So if you're not from here and you haven't had a bacon donut, why don't you try one? Fun and play on donuts. Maybe pass them to someone else and grab one of those knives. So we got some good, like real donuts that I think are actually worth something. So, oh, Keri, there want some in the back.
Sharing here, people. We're sharing.
We're sharing.
Make sure you pass it down. So that's great and everything like that, but I can't afford that and my hips can't handle that. So we might be stuck with a cake donut. So what does this have to do with content strategy? You might argue maybe nothing, and you might be right, and it's a stupid analogy. Or we can decide that our cake donut is really our minimal viable product, and dang it, if that's all I got, I'll take it. And really the vision that we want to head down towards to do really good content strategy in this world is to do the ideal donut. But we don't have time, we don't have money, our clients maybe don't know how to do this, maybe your clients, maybe you don't know where to start. It's really hard. And so what Keri and I wanted to talk about today is what can we do at minimum through the entire part of the process of production of making a website to actually do good enough. Today it's good enough. In 2, 3, 4 more years, it's going to be better. We're going to the better donut. But we can't do that. I mean, I don't know if anyone in here feels like they're doing full-on content strategy. It's amazing, it's great. It's hard, and it takes so much time and money. So we're going to really focus on what are the things we think are really important through the entire process at the baseline. And if you don't want to wait in the back to get a donut, you can just like tackle them down here and jump in.
Yeah, seriously.
They're going to be slow, but
Don't postpone joy. Donut enjoy.
Yeah. So the first thing we want to talk about just is really hiring help. I think people that I work these days are really open to hiring people. Setting aside $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 to hire some people. And I think that's important because it turns out people have jobs, right? So the average person works 47 hours a week. 4 out of 10 people work 50 or more hours. So as someone at an agency or maybe a client, you probably don't have time to do that on top of your job already. That's ridiculous, right? And then at the same time, you just might not be good at it, right? I don't write anything. I'm not a good writer. I'm not going to pretend that. There's awesome people out there that do that. But I can project manage content strategy through a project, and I can do that well. So maybe we just got to look at each single project, figure out where they're having a hard time. You know, maybe they can take good pictures. Great. Well, let's get a writer on board. Maybe they can't take good pictures. We need to hire someone for that. So I would actually recommend that we, as agencies, and you as clients, start setting aside money. I want to see $2,000 to $3,000, $4,000 in every single budget. I want it to go to either video, to stills, or a writer. And think about as hiring a writer, yep, what is $2,000 going to get me, right? You're probably thinking, not much. But what if you have them just write some top pages or some hard pages? I recently worked with the Science Museum in Minnesota, and they hired someone to write like 15 to 25 pages of their site. And they kind of use it as a template. It's great. It's, you know, it's easier than starting from a blank page. You've got something, you know the tone and voice, you kind of get the mood, and so take that, kind of cheat from it, that's okay. And then they wrote the rest of their pages, and they found it was a really big help. So I think we should be pushing for folks to be doing that. Now on to digital assets, and I'll let Keri talk about that.
I shouldn't have walked across the stage. Yeah, all right, so think about hiring somebody to help out with the project. And then internally, what we need to do is figure out how we're going to get our hands around content work in a way that's manageable for us and clients. So the first step is digest your assets. Figure out what's involved with the project. You probably did some analysis work during kickoff or discovery phases, but at some point you want to get your head around the site and figure out what's waiting for you so that you can lay the foundation for a client. And all of this begins with a content audit. Now, most of us probably think of content audits as these massive spreadsheets, just jam-packed with lots of minutia, mind-blowing amounts of data, and they're overwhelming to everybody except the one person who actually built the spreadsheet, right? Yeah. I used to be that person. And it's like, oh, no, Keri, no. I love a good spreadsheet. The deal is, though, that these content audits don't have to be a huge production. There is actually, I think, an MVP version of an audit. And it's pretty simple. You'd start out with these elements: navigation position, knowing where each page or node, to go all Drupal-y on us here, knowing where each item fits within the navigation structure. Capture that page title and the URL. Note the kind of content it is, right? Is it a page? Is it a blog? Is it a profile? We want to track that. It's also good to leave a column for general notes. And you know, what I'm going to put in there are things like, this is the page message, the purpose, the slide. There it came back.
Don't touch it. Huh? Just don't touch it. It's going out.
Alrighty. Alrighty. Gotta keep it interesting. So we're going to track general notes, and then you probably would also have a separate column for your initial assessment. When I'm looking at pages, there are just some flash judgments that come through my head, like, this is too long, this picture is really bad and it doesn't mean anything. You know, leave yourself a space to track that kind of data. Then,
and I'd also say, just to add, so what I like to do with my clients, so it's interesting, as Keri and I working together, we do it very differently, but it's kind of going to the same point. What I like to do is just make a column that says rewrite, purge, and I just decide that all by myself, and then I send it off to the clients. And you know, it's easier for someone externally to tell the folks that, you know, I just think we should get rid of it, and they don't have to, they can keep it, but it's much easier than internally trying to make those choices. So I think it's nice to be able to at least dump the first 20-25% and recommend that as an outsider to the client.
So we've got our MVP, then there's the sprinkles level of donutness, or extra credit. And what I'd include in that spreadsheet would be the page number. Come up with a good numbering system, and there are lots of ways to do that. You'll find examples out on the web, but assign every page a number. Look for instances where maybe the H1 doesn't actually match what they say the page title is. I've run into that. It's good to know when the page was last updated and who did it, right? How out of date is that content anyway? Looking, tracking, noting the keywords or other metadata. For files, noting what kind of file it is and how big is really good information. And then noting the audience that the page is intended to be for. Maybe, and then, you know, there are going to be judgments based on that. But, you know, all of this, really, what it comes down to is that the structure of your audit worksheet should really map really closely to what the project needs to do, what you need to do for a client, what you need to accomplish. And So don't go all out with a crazy huge spreadsheet. Just try to make sure that you focus on the important stuff, the MVP kind of stuff. You know, if part of your mission with the project is to improve use of the site, then maybe you're going to want to add columns to track statistics for social media use, like Facebook shares and tweets and all that kind of stuff. Or maybe you're going to want to track how often calls to action are placed on pages, how findable the page actually is. And I'm going to come back to that one, as well as ROT, redundant, outdated, trivial. Everybody knows that one, maybe. And then, as Lynn mentioned, another good column to track is keep, toss, or rewrite. So creating a customized kind of audit might look a little like this. I'm in a project where I think their content isn't easy to find. There are key pages that aren't in the menus, and the only way I seem to be able to get to them is if I happen to be on the right page. So, boy, that's something I want to fix. I'm going to track that trend within the site. The other issue is that they've got a lot of redundant content. So, boy, I'm going to make sure I've got a column in my spreadsheet for that. But I'm not going to go. I'm not going to try and track every single element. I'm focusing myself on what I need to do for the client.
And I think what's also interesting is that I don't currently, and I'm thinking of ways to really utilize, the people that I work with, my clients, in a better way. When you start a project, clients are super excited. In fact, they want to start before you can start. And so there's a lot of energy that they have, and they could be involved, and once you get them involved, they kind of can go along the path. If you're doing all this work in a vacuum over here, they're not going to connect with you, and they're not going to follow through with the rest of the project. So I'm kind of toying with the idea of having us, our team create kind of the shell of the document, and these would be maybe for smaller projects and not, hundreds or 50 pages and not thousands, but create the shell, put the spreadsheet out there, put the titles across the top, and have them fill out the titles and URL and structure. And then I can fill out the analysis component. But then they know what's on the site, and they can show up in discovery meetings really understanding what they have, and also understanding how bad some things are, because their site's pretty old. Another tool that you might want to consider is CAT, Content Analysis Tool. Has anyone ever used this before? Okay, I've tried it only a couple times, just going to be honest about that. What it does is essentially you put in your URL, you tie your Google Analytics account to it, and it provides this big spreadsheet that basically does the inventory for you, and then to the side of it, it puts all the analytics to it. So I think that's really the advantage of it. I think the disadvantage is that you're not looking at every single page. And what you do is you're digesting and analyzing as you look at it. So you're kind of cheating, but it's a great way to get your analytics into it. Another way is to ask your friendly Drupal developer to combine a spreadsheet with your analytics and the output from your website and combine it. I used to do that a lot, and took my developer 2-3 hours to do it. And for projects that were thousands of pages, it was completely worth it. For an example of kind of also a downside of that, so here's my team's website. So I ran this site through it, and I got pretty good data information, and all this stuff here, because I blew it up, is all the analytics on the side of it. So it actually gave me something that was worth it. Another client of ours that we haven't finished, amazing website. You could probably guess that it's super old, and it is. It basically dumped out junk. So if it's not current enough, it's not going to really dump out anything great. So it's not worth it for the older sites, but you know what, it's $25 for, I think, up to 5,000 pages, so $25. Did we push the start button?
I did. He did.
Yes! Oh! I'm like, oh no, oh no! This is why we have the monitors, right?
We got this, she says.
Anyway, we got it, we hit the button, yeah, okay. So, Keri's having a panic attack here.
Nope, it's all good.
All right, so we got your spreadsheet, and now we got to analyze it, right? So we're making some judgments along the way, but now we got to go a little bit deeper. So some of the things to start with is really asking these questions, and that's really working well. First, you want to make sure, as you're looking through and judging it, just as a clean first pass before diving into analytics, we want to make sure that we're aligning with the goals. What are the core project goals going forward for the organization and the users? Is the content matching up with that? Is the user even asking for it? Are they going to it? Do they need it? Do they want it? Is the information accurate, right? Which is really important for things in government or medical. If you don't have good information, then you're leading them down the wrong path. We're working on a site right now for HIV, and if we have content that is really old and not up to date, that's not putting good stuff out there. All right, another option is, does it have an owner? Has anyone been updating this content, and does anyone own it? If somebody doesn't own the piece of content, it goes away automatically. I don't want to even talk about it. Someone has to promise to care about this piece of content and update it.
All right, so yes, clearly this is a slide that introduces a section about analytics, right?
Clearly.
Because when you look at analytics, if you're like me, and I know everybody is, you're super excited, right? And there's just so much really great data and stuff to ingest, and it's just like a Cookie Monster kind of like, a moment, right? Yeah. So, when as a part of a process of examining and analyzing content, you're gonna look at analytics. And I personally have to practice restraint, crazy thought, and not let myself just plunge headfirst into all of the data.
And a great way to do that is time box yourself. So, if you have a smaller site, maybe you have 2 hours, medium 4 to 8, larger 8 to 12, and just say, whatever I get done in that time is what I'm going to get for this site.
Yep. So, how do I restrain myself? This is a great suggestion with time boxing. Is I, again, step back and ask myself, what is it that I need to bring to this project? What do I need to do for the client? I try to take myself back to thinking about the project goals, the client's needs, and also what I want to keep my eye on post-launch. Those crazy things called KPIs, key performance indicators. After I've added that level of thought, then I'm going to dive into analytics and start looking at the reports that are going to help me answer some of the questions, like, what are the users actually looking at, and how often are they using it, and gosh, what are they looking for when they're on the site, and how successful are any of these pages at actually doing the things that I just mentioned. And there are some basic reports that you probably have looked at, and they're really good. I consider them kind of an MVP part of an analytics review. And what always amazes me is how intimidating many clients find analytics, and how much they appreciate you just breaking it down for them and giving them some real gold to take back to their boss. You make a client look like a rock star, and suddenly you are a goddess, and that's a great thing to be. Yeah. So basic page. Everybody has probably looked at a report that of all pages, all content. You can get the really good nitty-gritty information out of this. How many times a page has been viewed, how often people are just bouncing off of it, how much time people are spending on it. This is all information that clients want to know. It's very, very MVP. Digging in a little bit deeper, there are the landing pages, right? So we want to know what pages are people frequently coming to the site and looking at, or rather, let me rephrase that. What are the first pages that they're seeing? What's the page that they look at right when they get there? And again, gosh, what's happening? How much time are people spending on those pages? And how often are they just bouncing off or actually taking the deep, using that landing page to go look at other content? Another report that I then like to look at is the navigation summary. So for landing pages, look at the navigation summary. Use it to figure out, how did people land on a current page, and where did they go after that? I think it's really interesting information, and it can help you. Your client might say, oh, no, this page is great. This page is great. Look at the behavior report and actually see, well, gosh, is that report doing what we want it to do for us? Search. Are folks tracking and watching search on their sites in analytics at all? This is one of my favorite things. Yeah. You have to enable it. So if you come to a project and somebody hasn't turned on site search, I really like to do that for them and at least start getting some information. What I love about it is that it can give you some really interesting insights into your content because you're getting a chance to see the number of visits that involved a search, and you're seeing which search terms were used and on which pages. So I'm on page A, and I can see that users were using search term X, Y, and Z, and then on a different page they were using W, the T, and U. Backwards. Yeah. So I think that gives you a good, some good insights into potential gaps within your content, and you can make some good assumptions and recommendations to clients based on what you're seeing in that search report. Then, of course, one of my last favorites is that events report, right? Where you're seeing just, gosh, how are people using some of the other assets on our site? Like files, like videos, the links we're providing. Let's see how well those are being used by folks. So, handful of 5 reports that really are good MVP tools for you as you're analyzing content and making recommendations for clients.
So one of the other things that we need to help our clients with is setting up the site structure, right? So this really comes down to like content types. You know, what are the fields and the pieces and the components that need to be there? It's really hard to sit down on a blank page, and I think if we can outline it in kind of a fill-in-the-blank form, not just say, oh, here's your content types, or here are the things, we talked about this, grab it from the wireframes or something. But I think it has to be such a low barrier that it's literally a form, like a Word doc or a tool where they're just filling in the pieces to do that. The other thing we need to do is make sure we give the deadline. So I've in the past oftentimes been like, oh yeah, you know, get all your content done by this date. That's when we're training, get it done, you got a month and a half. That's not good enough. We need to break it down into pieces, because shame on me, I've been project managing for 16 years, which means I'm old, but hey, I've been doing it a long time. I can break this into pieces. I can help folks with that. But people that are doing a website every 2, 3, 4 years, they don't know. So we need to help break those pieces down as we go. And one of the tools that both Keri and I have used is Gather Content. Anyone using this right now? Awesome. So it's a great tool. You put into the website, into this tool, you put in your site structure, you make unique templates, which are really your content types. You can assign them, give them different levels, so review, second review, send things back and forth, and then you can add inline comments. So it's all the editing that happens within it, and then it has a great little tool to pass it on to Drupal as well. So it's going to provide that connection. I know you guys import stuff like that, you can talk about that.
Yeah.
But it's only like 100 a month, 60 a month. It's really low bar. So if they're going to be writing content for 2 months or 3 months, that's nothing to have a great tool if there's more than one person writing content.
Right. So one of the great things about Gather Content, and I've certainly seen it evolve over the years, is it's become more and more fieldable, which means that if you know what your content types are, you can always add those into Gather Content, set up the fields, and create things like checklists and use radio options, create multi-value lists, short text fields, text areas. And I think you get pretty close to mimicking maybe 50% of what's available in Drupal. There's not going to be any like node entity stuff going on or entity reference. Darn it, I almost had that. I see the chuckles back in there. But you can set Gather Content up in a way that's going to, come pretty close to replicating the content model that you've got in mind for Drupal. You can let clients dig in, get started early on their content. That's a huge win. As Lynn said, you can stage the workflows, move people through a process of, I've written a draft. Now I'm ready for it to be reviewed. First reviewer, second reviewer, done. And with timelines, you can just really easily see where pages are within the process, which is super helpful. Kind of our pro tip, I hope I'm not giving away intellectual property here at all, she says to her bosses. We always like to add a field just for notes, so that as people are in Gather Content, they're working on stuff, they're like, oh, you know what, I gotta make sure that I place the video here, or I need to make sure that I add a file, I want to change this image, track that down. Everything gets, just auto-magically appears in Drupal, right? It's just magic. And
click a button.
Click a button. Woo! I love that part. contents in Drupal, and now our clients have this nice little notes field to reference as they're looking at the page in Drupal and getting ready to update it there. So it's Gather Content's a great tool. Now, if it's not in budget, we still got our standbys, page templates, woo, right? Gotta love a page template.
It's also not appropriate, so we just do a site that's like 10 pages. Like, I wouldn't set them up and gather content. I would just make them Word documents to fill in the blank in the content. It's just too much overhead to get it all set up and to teach them a new tool. Just use what we have. So it's with all of this, it's really figuring out what the client's needs are and finding the right match.
Right, yeah. But yeah, and a Google Doc, series of Google Docs can work really well. There's commenting. You can keep an eye on their work, make sure it's all shared.
That is really one of the most important things too, is accountability and keeping an eye on the work, because clients don't necessarily know how far they are or aren't, and we can kind of look at that progress and be like, oh, they're in trouble or they're doing okay. And so being able to have an eye on that really helps them out too.
So our MVP for adding structure to content. Identify content types. You guys all know that one, right? But then add them into a tool like Gather Content. Add them into a page template. Set up the fields or areas for people to add their text or images or files. Help them out by suggesting calls to action. People always appreciate that. Highlight the images. Again, giving suggestions on, oh, I think you're going to want a really good image here, or I know you did an audit, right? So you're like, you guys had this great video. It would work super well over at this spot. Giving them hints like that makes you look like a rock star. And then, also suggesting things like the limits, and as Lynn said, deadlines, super helpful. And then any kind of giving them a spot to keep track of maintenance notes or things to come back to is going to help them, again, put together content in a way that it's going to make it easy for you to move it into the site, whether it's automatically or manually. So,
and I think length limits are something people are asking us for more and more and more.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that has to be programmed in where they're going to get cut off. But people just really need to have a sense of like, I don't know how long a title could be or how long the body is. And if there's multiple people in an organization, especially like in a nonprofit, they're like, we're going to have 10 people be writing content. And so how do you tell this person over in this department how long to write it? Well, like, I'll just make it up. Like, I have a good sense of how long this page can be. We know, and sure, it might go over, it might be less, but now it's not going to be double the length. And so that helps guide that kind of internal process as well. All right, so finding your voice. I think it's really important to make sure that people understand how they're going to write before they do that, right? So this brings us to a content style guide. Does anyone have a process for writing content style guides right now for their team? Awesome. So not too many, like a little bit, yeah, right? That's all I feel. We're kind of on the fence of doing this, and part of it's like, well, who does it? The writer, the designer, who's in charge of this? But it's important, right? And this is the kind of thing of how we're going to be writing. What is the tone, the voice, and how it's going to come out and be consistent. So MailChimp is a really good example. They have an amazing one, and I think we can all know what MailChimp's brand is. And in fact, if you Google Content Style Guide, you'll find a bunch of them, a lot of them with universities that have published them online. But they've detailed out all the items. Now, we don't work on MailChimp, and we don't have that kind of money or time to do that, to invest in kind of the brand and voice. But we need to do something, right? So my idea that I've started implementing, and I haven't done long enough to know fully how effective it's going to be, but is to really kind of assign a homework assignment. I'm going to write like a Word doc or a Google Doc and have these fields. I want them to fill it out. I'm going to have them tell me, what's your voice and tone? I'm going to give an example to tell them what's the difference between a voice and tone. And so they understand that. And at least they're writing it down. So what they're doing is coming together as an organization, talking about how they want to be heard, and putting something on paper. That's going to get them further than not doing it at all and everyone just starting to write. So at least this can be some sort of guidance. So these are the things that we're currently toying with my kind of MVP concept. So, the overall goals of the project, let's state them again so that we know when we get to a page, we can also say, does this page align with those goals? What am I trying to do here? Make sure we know who we're talking to, the voice and tone of the writing, visual standards, because, a lot of the sites, visual is what we need to have, and that plays a big part in it. So what is good enough? And then really the channel distinction. So this is kind of the first time we're talking about the different places that we might be putting the content, and that area really needs to grow and explore. But for now, at minimum, I want them to start thinking about how they're going to cross-post and put their content out there. So homework is really kind of where I'm going with this right now. I'd love to hear later if anyone else has any ideas to do it, because I think it is a process the clients should be doing. I've also had a lot of the clients do that with their writers. So a writer can sit them down. This is part of their couple-hour, $1,000 project, and work on this to help isolate this out. Then we get into writing, and so we're not writers, right? You're not a writer, are you? No.
I play one on TV.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we just have some advice for writing. And I think the first thing is really you can't have it all. No one's going to get all of it done before launch. No one. Unless it's like 5 pages. It's just not going to happen. And so what I like to do is say this in the very beginning in the sales process. I like to say it again at the kickoff meeting. And then I like to say it again when we start talking about the actual time to be writing. And I make sure I say it in front of my project manager's boss as well. Because that's where the pressure's coming from. It's not necessarily that the person I'm talking to is having a problem understanding this. It's the boss expecting certain things there. So it's their job to know how to prioritize what's most important for the organization, but it's my job to say it's okay, give them a hug, give them a donut, and comfort them along the way, and let them know that they can put it in the day after launch and it's fine. So MVP.
So,
always your turn. It's you, Keri. It's that metal plate in your head.
right, forgot about that.
Yeah.
Not the metal hip. All right, so writing. Not only is it hard to get it all done, it's a lot of work, right? It is hard work. And the bottom line for web writing is that structure is so important, and less is way more than we ever think it is. And then plain language, boy, that's sprinkly donut goodness. Do folks know what I mean when I say plain language? Yeah. So that is saying things directly, simply, and leaving the nickel, dime, and quarter words in your back pocket. Pull those out once a day in front of your coworkers and they'll look like really smart, but don't throw them on the website. So making sure, helping your clients, the advice that I give clients is this: lead with key content first. Make sure you're chunking things up with headers and subheaders. Use write super short sentences, write short paragraphs. You can usually cut at least 50% of what you've written, bottom line. And when I was in a project that involved editing a lot of pages, I just was ruthless, and was what we needed to do. Obviously, bulleted lists are a good tool as long as you don't go all like 1920s Machine Gun Kelly with them and spit out a page that's just like bullets, right? Be judicious, use restraint. Use plain language, again, be short, be concise, say what you mean in as few words as possible, and then always checking the spelling and grammar is a good thing to do. The resources that I always like to tell people about, I think one of the best books is Letting Go of the Words by Ginny Reddish. Just like, I could read that once a year. It's just like the Lord of the Rings trilogy. You know, you pull that out once a year and read it. It's like Ginny Reddish, too. She's right on that list. And then gov.uk, they have really good writing guidelines. It's just exceptionally helpful. And I don't think there's probably any traffic on that page today. Right? Thank you.
I'm with you.
Okay. All right.
On that one, I'm with you.
So writing MVP, good recommendations. And then I think both Lynn and I have talked a lot about how important structure is to help people get through the project. Giving people a work plan for moving forward. You've told them how to write, or rather what to write and how to express themselves. The next thing is really just what they need to do, that work plan for getting it done. And it just boils down to what they're going to write, who's going to do it, and when. That's the MVP level. Make it really clear. And then after that, if more tracking is useful and helpful to them, add it into the spreadsheet. Track who's going to grab the images, and who's responsible for the movie, or the video that would go on the page, and who's our final reviewer, and who's got final say-so. Putting that all together in a spreadsheet and tracking progress is how you get people through that very daunting, heavy lifting part of writing.
So there's a couple tips that I've learned and heard from my clients for us to share with our clients. So if you're a client, consider yourself a client here, can think about. One is to gather media first. Find all your pictures and videos right away. Otherwise, as you write content, you're going to try to be looking. If one person can gather all the stuff that's acceptable visually for your brand, they'll have a pool to pick from, and that's really helpful, especially when you're working with more than 2 or 3 people. Work by section or type. So it might be really easy to be like, oh, I know what to write on that page, I know what to write that page and that, and then also you have the hard stuff left. It's better to go by a section in your navigation or a type of content, because then your mind's in what the purpose of that content is, why we're writing it, and how I'm going to write it. I ask my clients to send me 2 to 3 samples of each content type before we start building. Now, does it happen very often? No, but I am damned if I don't get it soon. Because that way, and then we can build to that, right? And also, I can see it and say, well, this is too long, or what about this, or what about that, and they can get some feedback before they write everything. Also, we need to get something done. Let's get started. It's a good way to do that. So writing early and finding something, maybe a content type so obvious, it's a certain resource or something that we know how it's going to lay out. It's not questionable about the structure, the functionality. So let's write that way in the beginning of the entire project. And then really prioritize for launch. Take that big spreadsheet, decide what's the most important, and work backwards. It's an iterative process, so start from the top. That's the most important. We're going to roll into content testing. I'm going to tell Keri to talk fast because we only have 20 minutes. Looking at you. So the thing about content testing, it's interesting. So Keri and I both worked on a project at Gordon Studios, and we worked together, and we got the pleasure of doing a lot of different things on that project, including doing like 5 different kinds of testing. And we went down to Missouri for a couple of days, which is amazing, and we sat with people and we were testing this functionality in this section we kind of made, right? And you know what all the feedback was? Almost completely, it was all about content. They couldn't find the headers, they couldn't find the text, they couldn't find the button. It had nothing to do with functionality. So I kind of find we're like smart Drupal developers, right? I'm not, but you guys are. We've kind of got that pretty well for a lot of things. It's the content that's really tripping people up. And so we really believe a minimal amount of content testing is pretty important.
Yep. And here at the university, there's the testing lab, and oh my gosh, is it an amazing resource. It's also pretty darn expensive to try and come in and use it, right? But the point is that there are things that you can do on projects that don't involve thousands and thousands of dollars and hours for testing. So let's talk about how we get through some of that easily. One of the first things we want to pay attention to with our content is, gosh, is it readable? Right? Can people just even understand what we've put together? And all of that, all those good practices that we talked about earlier as far as writing, that all comes into play when it comes to readability. The fact whether or not a page has headers, if sentences are short, if the paragraphs are short, all of that is going to make the page easier for people to scan and read. So a simple test of readability is just looking at some of your clients' key pages and scanning them and seeing, gosh, can I make sense of this? If you can't, you might need to step back and revisit it with them. A second, perhaps more less qualitative tool is something called readable.com. And what that does is you plug in a URL, and the site returns a rating of readability, grade reading level of your content.
You can also just copy and paste your text and throw it in there as well.
Right.
It's not on the site yet.
Now, what is it? 49% of Minnesotans read at a level that is less than grade 12. So it's easy for people, I think, to produce writing that's kind of complicated. We feel more secure if we sound really smart, but that content is often really, really hard to read. And so it's not only going to be hard to read for folks who don't have a high literacy rate, it's also going to be a pain in the butt for the rest of us who just want to scan the page, get what we need, and get on with what we want to do, right? So paying
your search engines too.
right. So paying attention to the readability and the grade level of your pages is an important thing to do. And this is going to give you that kind of like outside judgment. That's not about you making a judgment call. It's really, well, this is according to these different measurements. This is what the content looks like. A second facet of content testing is findability. All right, so awesome. You took early drafts of content, you scanned it, yep, I can scan it. You put it into readable.com, yep, it's got a nice, it's nice, maybe 6th grade, 7th grade reading level, perfect. Now, the content's on the site, can people find it? That's another aspect of testing that we should do with our content. Figure out if content is it can be retrieved. And maybe that's through search, and that's an easy thing to test by just typing in the search button. Another great thing to do is use a tool like TreeJack, for testing findability. TreeJack is a paid subscription kind of service, but with the free plan, you can do a number of small tests, like 3 tests. Put together your tasks that involve people locating where they would find specific pieces of content, plug all or part of your sitemap into TreeJack, and then people get to answer questions. And you'll get a sense of whether or not people are finding the pages that you want them to find. It's a good way to test your architecture and the labeling that you've used on menu items. Lynn mentioned the project down in Missouri and the testing that we did on that. Yes. No donuts. No donuts were harmed in the production of that website.
It's basically the DNR of Minnesota.
Yes,
Missouri.
Right. And what we wanted to find out was, gosh, can people figure out what the rules are, where and what the rules are for deer hunting? And we spent a lot of time categorizing and grouping content by species. I mean, it was a lot of work to reorganize things. And boy, what we found right away is that everybody went to the most complicated page on the section on the site, which is regulations. And the learning from that was, okay, we're going to have to work on that regulations page, make it easier for people to use, because they just were not keying in to species at all. They weren't finding the content through what we thought was going to be a really good route for them. And it was an eye-opener. The third facet of content testing, comprehension. So maybe people can scan it, and they can find it. But can they make decisions and judgments based on what they have in front of them? And that's kind of like the final dimension of testing that's important to perform. Happily, it's easy to do. It does mean that you need to go out and actually interact with people a little bit. But what you want to do is figure out a test, a question that involves people engaging with your content in some way. So again, the Missouri project, we needed to figure out if people could tell me, one of the questions I asked was, all right, so how many deer can you take when bow hunting? I didn't use the word limits, right? I didn't use the word archery. And so the test was figuring out if people could look at the page, key in on the content that applied to them, read it, and then give me the correct number. And again, this kind of test highlighted both the writing that we were using on the site. We were definitely trying to make the transition to plain language, and also just how well headers were placed and pages could be found in the site. So it was definitely another one of those insightful things. It's really comprehension testing. I think it can sound like, oh, I don't know, it doesn't sound very MVP, but it really is an easy MVP thing to do. Come up with 3 tasks that again, involve people looking at content. Go down to Starbucks. Lynn loves herself some Starbucks. Go down to Starbucks, buy a person a cup of coffee, and sit down with them for 5 minutes and ask them to do those 3 tasks. Ask them to look for something or to make a judgment or a choice based on what they're seeing on a page. It's always good to test as much as you can before you build. happily you can test comprehension, or I'm sorry, happily we can test readability and findability before we start building a website, if you've got the content, of course. You want to try and test, honestly, those first couple levels of navigation, as well as any other key pages in the site. And as I said, look for 3 tests that you can do. Test with 3 to 5 people. You will learn a lot just from that small number. And go to Starbucks or your locally owned whole grain donut shop, right? With the beans that they just roasted that morning.
So Keri lives in cool Minneapolis and I live in Burbs. What can I do? So that can be overwhelming, but like Keri said, it's very easy at a conference like this, at an event, anything. You just grab some people or down the hallway. So we got a couple more things, and I'm going to cruise through them a little fast just because we're running short on time. But maintenance, governance. Anyone have a really strong governance plan in place for content? Yes, that's what I thought. This is the problem, right? Everyone gets to the finish line and they're tired and they're done and they don't get more time to work on the site. So my idea is that we're going to wait to maintain, right? We don't do governance, talk about governance now. Instead, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to go to my client's office in 3 months after the site's done, and now we have a breather, and I'm going to do a 2-hour little training walking through the things that they need to get in place, and we're going to start working on that governance plan and provide enough guidance that they can then walk through the rest of that plan after that, because nobody's going to do it now. So let's wait a little bit and see what happens. And this is really maintaining not only the old stuff, but the new stuff. The new stuff's more sexy, but we've got the old stuff there, and we don't want to pile that problem right back up for the next site redesign. So what I like to talk to folks about is, first of all, the workflow. Who's doing what now, right? We had all these writers who probably don't anymore, so who's the new players, and how does the content need to go in? Who do they need to talk to? Who needs to review it? How do we flow it in and out? What's their calendar going to look like? Okay, what's your goals for the organization for the next year? Okay, let's break it down by quarter. How does the content support it? What channels is it going to go on? All right, we got some topics, we can assign some things. How are we going to maintain content, right? So let's take a look at over the year, take all those content types, break them up, and every quarter maintain a couple of them. Take a fresh look at it, what needs to be updated, and do a nice pass at it. And then make sure that somebody's in charge of looking at your analytics, measuring your progress, making sure that you're being successful. So don't leave the room until you assign someone that duty, and if they're not sure about how to do analytics, we can either help them or they can take the Google Analytics course. Simple as that, but it's super important to continue to show proof and progress. So final topic. Wow, this goes fast. Managing politics. So this isn't actually like a task or a thing to do, but trying to help our clients figure out how to do this within their organization. Some of the biggest problems I often hear is that they don't want to get rid of it. It's too important, or how do I decide this? I don't have the authority. I was just talking to someone earlier before the session about that issue. Like, see, clearly nobody's going to, and they're like, I don't care. Like, it's hard. It's hard internally. So there's a couple methods that I've seen clients do, or I've recommended that I think kind of worked out. The first thing is really providing tailored individual communication. So there's a group of stakeholders, right, that get to be part of the web design, and then there's an additional group of stakeholders that don't, and they're out here and they care. Maybe some care, maybe some don't, but the website has something of theirs on it. So there's a couple things to do. One, folks like me can do stakeholder interviews at the start of a project. Go meet with those people, give them 30 to 45 minutes to talk about what they want to see on the site, and they have a moment to provide some input. I also tell clients to set up a meeting with the extended stakeholder group every 3 weeks. Every 3 weeks there's going to be something new done on the website. They can present that document to the full group and ask for feedback. Because it turns out people just want to be heard and a chance to know what's going on. They're not trying to derail the project, but they want to say something. And you might get some feedback you needed to hear that needs to be inputted into the project. I've also had clients do one-on-one meetings with certain people. Maybe the person's a little tough, or maybe that person's content got moved from the top to the bottom of the site and it's a little hard for them. So doing some one-on-one communications just to let them know that they're heard. And frankly, you know, if there are problems in the site launch, we can add content back in. We can make adjustments. We understand that they're important. Another thing is just using the stats, right? Stats are a great thing to do. You can't argue with that. So besides analytics, we can also do tree depth testing, which Keri also talks about. I've been on maybe 5 projects where people have just gone bananas about where their content's positioned in the sitemap. So we put the sitemap in, ask 10 to 15 questions. We send it out to external people, we send it out to internal people, and we see what the results are. And we certainly learn something and make some adjustments. But then the folks freaking out about people not finding their content, okay, they found it, we got it. They're okay, and they kind of settle down a little bit. And it's a great, what kind of test results it gives you as well is, it'll tell you how fast someone can find the right answer and if they found the right answer. So this is a lot of good information to share with the internal stakeholder groups as well. Offer a backup plan, right? So I run into this a lot with like universities or school districts, like, but when I have the school prom next year, I won't see the website where I can have all the information copying it from. Okay, I'll just put your old site over here. If you want to go look at it, go look at it. It's fine. I don't know how many people do, but at least it's there. So the person that's kind of stressed about that will know that they can always access that for at least 1 year. And finally, just make me be the bad guy. I have no problem kind of, not like dealing with the internal products politics instead of making people kind of fight it out together. That's what I'm here for. So I'll happily talk to folks and try to figure out their problems and show them where we're heading. So that's it. We talked a long time, went through hiring help, going through your content inventory, analyzing it, making sure they have a structure and pieces, finding the voice so we know how we're going to be writing, and then some tips on writing, the content testing, waiting to maintain and not jumping right into it, and also managing the politics within it. So those are ways to connect with us. We have about 5 minutes for questions, sorry, but we'll stay around longer too if you guys have questions. So, questions? More donuts, Steve. There's 2 boxes up there. I don't know if they're empty. There's still donuts? Anybody want a donut?
That is admirable.
That's good Minnesotan right there.
It isn't. It's a Drupal camp miracle.
We got one right here.
Do you want to go into I have a question? So it talks about the content audit matrix, right, that we're all familiar with. In your experience, is there a point in time in terms of scalability of the site where it just doesn't make sense to use anything like it? Makes good sense for a site that's got a dozen nodes or 100 nodes, but once you get into thousands or tens of thousands, is that even the right tool?
Which tool?
A content
So
audit.
spreadsheet.
The
Excel.
spreadsheet?
For auditing all of it.
Honestly, I mean, we both worked on a site that had 20,000 nodes on it, and it was, but we moved into gather content. I mean, well,
Yeah.
you can replace, but I think one thing is as you get bigger, there is a point where you break it into pieces.
Rolling audits.
So
Right.
there is a point when you start to break it in pieces. I know the donut was distracting, right? So like, it's like I asked a question, but I want a donut. So with 20,000 nodes, we broke it into I think 4 or 5 different chunks and just dealt with that as pieces because nobody could process that much stuff.
Right.
So as far as breaking it up, and then what's your opinion on?
Well, my opinion
spreadsheet
is I go back to
versus-
project goals. What is it that I need to get done for the client? I don't think that, assuming that the budget doesn't encompass touching every one of those 20,000 pages, I'm going to laser focus myself in on the stuff that's important to them.
So, go ahead. What do you like to have in place before beginning the content audit so that you can make your assessment of what is trivial or not, what's applicable to the user, what's the right level of complexity of languages, all those kind of things that you're going to be evaluating as you're doing the audit. What do you like to have as like your baseline you're using to set those criteria?
Yeah, we actually have a different opinion about this. So I like to make the base audit before a kickoff meeting so that I can actually walk in and I know the things that are on the site. So I get the base thing in and do that first pass of like, this just goes. I mean, I haven't even talked to you, but I can tell this goes. And I write a reason why, so then maybe they'll change their mind. Like, oh, I haven't updated this for 3 years, that's fine. And get that done. And then I have a kickoff meeting, we do our navigation, our user stories, and our wireframes. And then I do the deeper pass to make sure all of the goals of the project, I understand what we need and where we're going, and then go in and change the structure of the audit and the analysis of that at that time. But you do it differently.
I do, and I wait until after the kickoff meeting. I wait until I've got my prioritized list of user stories. Because I find that sometimes I maybe am a little off in my focus, and I just want to feel really tuned into what the client needs. And I find that, you know, RFPs, I hate RFPs, but, you know, RFPs will say one thing, you get people talking, and it's a completely different project. And so I like to have the opportunity to react to that.
I think both of us basically wait till we understand what the project, where it's heading before we do the deep analysis.
Yeah, but that wasn't enough of a throwdown.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can prepare for my kickoff meetings, but whatever.
I like to listen.
That's true, actually. I'm not good at that.
No, she's not.
Anything else?
All right, y'all know we got lunch, right?
He's got a question.
Oh,
You were listening, right?
I was managing a camp, okay? Back off.
You guys have really good resources for writers and writing. I was curious if you had much experience working with researchers who are trying to disseminate information to the general public, but tend to use lots of very expensive words and highly detailed language.
Yeah, my take on that is, well, my version of that was working, again, the DNR project that we talked about. Oh, you know, they've got special language. Not entrapment, there's impoundment. An impounded body of water is one that's surrounded on 3 sides by something or other, right? I mean, I was like, come on, nobody and their dog, nobody and their retriever knows what impounded waters means, right? And so we went round and round and round, and you know, I will be honest, the legal people won on that one, the enforcement people won. The deal is though, the project, I do push back, right? And I say, look, I'm not understanding this. I don't think that I can put this in front of 5 people and have them understand it. You do need to know your audience, right? I'm not always the audience for a page. So checking in on that is important. So check in with your audience, push back, push them towards using plain language, and gosh, I had my last thought. And then prioritize things. You can't win every battle. That gets back to Lynn's conversation about politics, right? Some pages should be complex. Talking about the hydrolyzation of carbon molecules within an aqueous environment. Okay, there's thank you. I'm working on a site that involves lots of chemistry at the moment. You know, yeah, for the person reading that page, go talk about your research and use the words that make sense to the audience, right? But if it's a landing page where you're trying to translate the amazing work that's happening at the Department of Chemistry here at the university, and you want the public to see the great things you're doing, boy, I'd steer myself away from an aqueous environment of hydrolyzed carbon molecules in a solid state.
I think another option too, like with the government, there's a lot of like things that have to be there by law. And so I think separating the pieces, so maybe there is the English version and then there's the PDF attachment. And I know that's kind of like dirty to say that we put PDFs with the content in there, but if they have to have that by law and it's all, you know, there's somebody to look through, somebody will, someone needs it, but the English stuff on the site and then provide that option as well. That sometimes helps you both. Yep.
To have someone write blog posts that digest the more complex information.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And it's good for SEO, it's good for like
bravo.
shareability, that you can tweet out your links and all that.
Yeah.
I like it.
All right. Have lunch?
Everybody knows where to go, right?
The camp organizer. Let's go. Where do we go?
All right, so there's the Sullivan Cafe. Get around. Just go out and around. The Sullivan Cafe is where they're staging lunch, and it's out and to the right.
There'll be people there.
Yeah, there will be.